Hi, it's Selwyn, founder of, well, lots of things, but included here and relevant to here, Ethical Influence Institute. And so here we are for Module 5, which is you, influential, question mark, raise of voice, raise of tonality of voice at end of word. We're looking at the whole issue. So far we've gone into a great amount of detail and depth, at least as much as I can possibly do in a series like this and video. Of really understanding the other person, right? The person we're actually going to be influencing. However, you are also important, right? So you, as in you, the person influencing. So even if you do grasp and have an excellent understanding of exactly where the other person is coming from and what motivates them to do what they do and what motivates them to trust and what motivates them to take action and what stops them and all the rest of it, even if you get all that, if you are fundamentally not an influencer, an influential person, then you still won't be influencing them. So we absolutely have to look at that and address that as well. The reason I've done it the way round that I've done it though is that this is our natural tendency. Our natural tendency as human beings, for reasons explained kind of at the end of the last module, right? We tend to be self-centric, right? I recently read an author in a book recently about neurochemistry a few days ago who said a little quote about how our model of the world is basically that we're the center of the universe and we're constantly kind of frustrated and disappointed when the world disproves this particular model. And this is just kind of how we're wired, almost like we can't blame ourselves, although we can certainly seek to rise above it in the same way that we can't blame ourselves for, say, having violent inclinations. Although we can't blame ourselves, however, does that make it okay? No, we still need to rise above it, right? So I would consider feeling like a victim or feeling like everything revolves around you as being something similar to, feeling violent, in the sense of maybe it doesn't cause as much obvious damage, but ultimately, on a global level, maybe it does cause as much damage. Maybe it actually causes more damage to have a bunch of self-centered people than it does a bunch of violent people. Who is to say, I'm not that much of an expert that I can really quantify that or know how. Point is, it's a big deal, right? But it is our tendency to focus on ourselves. So that is why I've taken this training and really tended to focus on the other person first and foremost, right? Because that is correct. However, there is, as I put here at the beginning, a paradox of influence. So here, it's not really a paradox, but it kind of seems like a paradox. I thought that's a cool way of introducing it. The paradox is that, so the fact is that whoever you're influencing is going to be on a conscious or probably more often unconscious level, as soon as they have decided at least that they have no choice but to, or they want to, pay attention to you, right? So as soon as they've got that far, or they're actually paying attention to you, they are, and this is really true in all communication and interaction, to be honest, not even just an influence one, but it's especially important with an influence one. So within any interaction, any communication, as soon as someone's paying attention to you, they are very carefully scrutinizing you and judging you, right? As I say, on a mainly unconscious level. And so certainly in a position where you're attempting to influence them, they are very carefully scrutinizing and judging you and making all kinds of judgments. They're making judgments. So the first judgment is this person worth paying attention to at all, right? Second judgment is going to be what status do they have, right? So in fact, let's write these down and relate them to the neurochemicals. So the first question someone's going to ask when they're, and I say unconsciously, we could maybe use the word automatically, right? But unconsciously is probably more commonly used. So people will unconsciously or automatically evaluate you. So the first question they're asking is, are you worth paying attention to? And so that question tends to come from the reptilian part of the brain, right? The most basic instinctual part of the brain. And so the question is really based on cortisol, right? It may be based on, dopamine to some degree. Maybe like you have something they want or you are something that they want, right? But usually it's cortisol. So usually we're going to go for that one, right? And it's just on a very simple level, it's if someone a face-to-face example, for instance, if they walk into your showroom or whatever, if you're a salesperson there, if they walk into your shop, if you're a salesperson behind a counter or whatever, and the first thing they're gonna, if you kind of approach them or you're nearby, the first thing, are you worth paying attention to at all? Do they even acknowledge that you exist, right? And so that's going to be based on cortisol. And to be honest, it's the very simple cortisol of, this is another person who I don't know yet. Are they a threat, right? So that's the first thing. So in a face-to-face interaction, this is normally quite easy. It's normally quite difficult to ignore someone if you're in a room with them. It's very difficult to ignore them, for instance, if they're up on stage and you've gone, somewhere to pay to see people talk on stage, especially if it's that person, if that person is you, right? So, not such a big deal when we're talking about face-to-face encounters. Much more difficult, though, for instance, if you are influencing via the internet or via a book. Let's say, I don't know, you want to start a new religion, you want to write a book, right? So why am I going to pay attention to your, religious book, right? Or spiritual book or whatever, right? There's going to be something that still, to get straight away, to get the cortisol going, or perhaps, as I say, the dopamine, to mean that you're worth bothering with at all, right? And from the reptilian part of the brain, it's basically the one who decides that. And so, generally, if you're not a threat and you're not part of my everyday things that I already focus on, then you're probably not coming in. That's kind of the cortisol perspective. So how do we get around that? Well, for instance, one of my most successful headlines, so on the internet base I'm talking about now, right, is how to detox safely and effectively, right? Very, very simple. What's that got to do with cortisol? Why does that help to get people to pay attention? Because, detox safely, yeah. And if people are into detox and they're worried about the safety of it, that's a little bit of a cortisol spike, right? So I'm not like generating loads of fear in someone with that headline, but it's just enough to get attention, right? Do you see the distinction there? So the next thing after they ask, are you worth paying attention to, is what's your status, right? And this really goes hand in hand with another one, but I'll deal with this one first. So the question is, what's your status? So again, this is a particularly powerful and compelling if you're face-to-face with someone or you're in the same room with them or whatever. If you judge that the person is of a higher status than you, then that does kind of increase the threat and reduce the serotonin. So in that sense, it may actually seem like a bad thing. But if we're talking about wanting to influence someone, we actually want the person to see us as higher status than them. Generally, there are exceptions to that, but generally we do, right? Because we want them to go along with what we are saying, basically. to simplify it, we're going to talk more about this in a bit, right? So I'm going to write down serotonin because it's a serotonin issue, this whole issue of status, right? And really hand in hand with that question is another question. The next question they're going to ask is, can I trust you, right? What they're really asking with that is actually, are you in the same tribe as me, right? Now, obviously, with tribe, I don't necessarily mean, are you part of the family or my close-knit group of friends, but, well, I'll give you an example. Like, when I first started, the tribe that I spoke to was people who were keen on or aspirational to raw foods, right? So I was in the raw food tribe. And I was into it when I first started, right? Like I only raw foods, 100% raw foods. So that was my thing, and I was a member of the tribe. Because of that, because I ate 100% raw foods, that was a genuine thing. I was really into it, really, believed it, was really giving it a good go. I was a bona fide member of the tribe, right? I'm not anti-raw foods now, but I don't consider myself so much like definitely in that tribe above and beyond all others. So that was my tribe, right? And so when people were evaluating me, can I trust you? Is first of all, well, is he a raw fooder? Is he a raw vegan, right? Vegan is another great example, right? But I used to have this all the kind of things. I remember when I used to take drugs, there was like, I used to smoke a lot of cannabis, and basically the question you'd ask is, are they a smoker? If they smoke cannabis, then they get it and they're cool, right? And then, okay, I can trust them, they're part of my tribe. And if they don't, then they don't, right? Nowadays, to be honest, I feel a little bit that way with, are they an entrepreneur? Are they someone who's in business for themselves? And I kind of feel like if they are, then they kind of get it. They get this thing about self-responsibility and contributing and adding value to the world. And if they're not, well, if they're aspiring to that, then that's great. But you know what I mean? Like if they're kind of anti doing anything in the world, kind of protesting, I don't feel like that person's in the same tribe as me, even though they used to be. I totally used to relate to that kind of person, right? So that changed. So, you know, just a few random examples from my own life, but I hope that can help you kind of see and relate to. Maybe, I know, you know, a few members of one of the groups I'm in that are all kind of they all homeschool their kids, right? So maybe if that's you and you meet other people who homeschool their kids, or they talk about homeschooling their kids, immediately feel like, I can trust them. They're in the same tribe as me. They believe that homeschooling kids is a good idea, right? Do you see what I mean? Do you see what I'm getting at? So now, so that explains, and of course that's helping to bring about a feeling of oxytocin, if they can trust you, right? And so now, I can kind of explain this connection. We're going to go through this a little bit more in a minute. This is just kind of an introduction to it. So, yes, it is true to say that if you meet someone who's higher status than you on an mammal level, that kind of raises your threat and reduces your serotonin. But if you see that other person as being a higher status member of your tribe, that also substantially reduces cortisol, threat, feeling of there's something wrong, and increases your oxytocin, this feeling of I'm safe, I'm trusted, or I can trust, I feel connected, because generally we kind of lack leaders and we don't feel like a leader ourselves. That's the kind of common thing. Again, I'm going to address this more in a little bit later segment of this whole training, Module 5. And so we feel pleased, we feel happy, right? So what's your status? Okay, so you're high status and you're the same tribe as me. That feels good, right? I don't really feel a lot of status from that. I just feel like I can relax, my threat level can go down, and my level of connection and feeling safe and trusting can go up because there's an alpha around, and I feel good when there's an alpha around. If you might have noticed me talk about that in Module 4, how mammals, basically with very few exceptions, are all pack animals, and when there is no alpha and when we don't feel like there's an alpha around, we feel anxious, right? So it's very, ironically, you know, so normally as we described in the previous training, having an alpha around kind of means, maybe it's not safe for me to eat, so there's that, but that's overridden by the fact, but it's better to have an alpha around than no alpha, because with no alpha I've got no protection and I've got no sense of direction because I struggle making my own decisions and you know, there's all kinds of issues, right? So overall, I'm happy to meet an alpha from another member of my tribe, right? So they're asking those questions, and another question that's very, very relevant for influence at least, that they'll soon be asking, especially if they're busy people or people who are goal-oriented, shall we say, and that is some version of, do you have something I want, right? Now, of all the questions, this is the least likely to come up. They're all very likely to come up, but these three are pretty much automatic. You can't stop it. With this one, it's not necessarily going to come up, right? It may not come up because you just assume that they don't have anything you want. It may not come up because it's completely obvious to you immediately that they do have something you want, so it may not always be a question. But it's very, very likely to be, right? And so, of course, that's relating to dopamine, right? And that's a question that we very much want someone to ask in our mind if we are influencing, because it may be, do you have something I want? It may be, can you help me get what I want? You know, but something along those lines, right? We want them to think that way, because if they feel like, yes, you do, then they're going to listen more, they're going to pay attention, they're going to pay attention despite their anxiety easing off, because if their anxiety is, you know, going down, the cortisol is going down because they feel like they can trust you, because you're an authority in their tribe, then, you know, then also maybe, even though they're going to pay attention to you to some degree because you're an authority, still they're just going to lose interest after a while, get bored, get distracted, unless you have that constant dopamine surging, I can get something I want, I can get closer to something that's important to me, and then people are all ears, right? They're really paying attention, which is essential for you to be able to influence. So, this is just an example. I wouldn't treat this as comprehensive, but it's a good start, and you can see how the four most important, the most powerful of the neurochemicals that we've talked about are used in a practical sense again. So these are all the questions that they're going to ask about you, right? So going back to the original point of the paradox of influence is that yes, people are going to be scrutinizing you very carefully, they're going to be evaluating you, they're going to be judging you in these various ways, which I've already given as examples, right, pretty much immediately. And yet, despite that being the case, if your primary focus is on you or the fact that that is happening, you are going to fumble and probably completely fail at influence, right? So it's ironic, right? So you get up on stage in front of 100 people, for instance, nightmare, right? For most people, you're gonna have ideally, like, maybe if you go up and they're not interested, that's even worse. But ideally, you're gonna have 100 people who are all intensely scrutinizing you, going, is this person worth listening to? And can I trust them? And are they higher status than me? And all of that stuff, right? And yet, if you're aware of that, if you allow yourself to be aware of that and you make that your focus, oh my God, they're judging me. Am I coming across as being trustworthy? Am I coming across as being confident? Am I interesting? Do I appear to have something of value to offer? If that is if other people's judgments of you, or evaluations or whatever we're going to call it, of you is your primary focus, then you are your primary focus. And you immediately fail all of those tests I just showed for you, right? If we go back to them. Is someone whose primary focus is on themselves rather than me worth my time? So no, not worth paying attention to. We may not even bother with any of these, but let's assume, for hypothetical sake that we do. So what's their status? A person who is very much focused on themselves and what other people think of them, how do we perceive their status? Very low, right? It's one of the most reliable, foolproof, because people can pretend to be high status, they can buy expensive things, they can, get expensive haircuts and makeup, and they can kind of try and act haughty or snobbish or confident or whatever, right? So you can fake it in a lot of ways, but the one thing that you can't really fake is not being self-obsessed, right? If you fake not being self-obsessed, you'll actually become not self-obsessed, and therefore it's not faking. It's not something that's fakeable, unlike walking around with a cocky attitude, or unlike walking around with expensive clothes, or whatever it might be, right? So people who are focused on themselves and what other people think of them are low status. They will always be perceived to be low status, even if they are pushy and dominating and aggressive and all of those other things that, on a mammal's level are high status. They're still always going to be seen as low status, and rightly so, right? Whereas someone who focuses on the other person, genuinely on the other person, that doesn't necessarily make you high status, right? It could just be that you are a low status person who's very good at focusing on someone else. So an absence does not equal necessarily an elevation, but so an absence of self-obsession doesn't necessarily make you high status, but the more self-obsessed you are, the more low status you are, definitely, right? You may think that that's not the case through examples that you've had, right? So in that case, I would challenge you to see that either the person who you're thinking of wasn't very high status, or, well, let's think of a good stereotypical example. What about the Hollywood celebrity, right? Classically narcissistic, self-absorbed, enough about me, what do you think about me? Classically that kind of type, right? So that seems to completely contradict what I'm saying here. And yet, right? Hollywood celebrities managed to become a Hollywood celebrity because they have managed to crack being able to add a lot of value to a lot of people in whatever way, even if it's a way that you may be judged to be superficial or, worsening society or whatever, they've still managed to crack that, probably more than you, how to add value to a large amount of people, right? And they've cracked the whole issue of how to influence at least some people to in turn influence other people to make them highly successful, right? So even though they might appear to be self-obsessed or narcissistic, they still, in their mode of operation, obviously are at least able to suspend their self-obsession for periods of time in order to be very much focused on other people, in order to provide value in the case of being in movies or being on stage or whatever it is that they're doing, right? And in terms of being able to sell whatever it is that they're doing, right? So even the exception or the apparent contradiction, I would say, it's not a contradiction. It is actually no. And I've met those kind of people who do appear to be completely, it's all about me, and yet I can see they're actually shrewd influencers who are like, so maybe for instance, they're always talking and they seem to always be talking about themselves. But if you actually pay attention, the stories that they're telling about themselves are really about the other person, and they're influencing them. That's an example, and very common in NLP, for instance, something that will teach you how to do that in great detail, should you be interested in learning something like that. But yeah, so it's very, very interesting. So yes, despite those kind of exceptions that may bubble up in your mind, or maybe you don't know celebrities, but maybe you know other people. But yeah, so that fact still holds, right? So are you self-obsessed? Well then, you got low status, right? That's going to be the thing. So yeah, and if you're very good looking and you've got nice clothes and you act confident and all the rest of it, might give you a little bit more status, but ultimately you're not going to be seen as a high status person. You're still going to be seen as, medium, low kind of thing. Next question, can I trust you? Can you trust someone who's self-obsessed? Well, you can trust them to be self-obsessed, but, are they in the same tribe as me? Well, I guess if you are self-obsessed, you might get that the other person is, but yeah, not really, right? You get the point. Generally, we don't trust people who are self-obsessed. And you have something I want. Well, that's the one that's more open, right? So maybe you have something I want despite being self-obsessed. But these ones are really the crucial ones, right? Because as I said, we have to get through those usually before we get to that one. And so if you're not worth paying attention to, you're low status, and I can't trust you, and even if you have something I want, if I can't trust you, I've got to be a bit of a fool to get involved with you, right? So there you go. So I know I've gone around the houses with that one a little bit, but the key point is the paradox of influence. It is all about you, and yet if you maintain awareness of the fact that it's all about you, then you will lose all ability to influence. It's a bit of a contradiction, right? So what we have to do is we have to get ourselves right, as it were, as I'll talk about here, and then forget all that, especially when we're actually, whatever it might be. So when we're actually up in stage in front of those 100 people, or when we're actually writing an article, or when we're actually talking to someone face to face about something that we want to offer them, right? Some opportunity, some kind of influence conversation, basically. Or we're filming the video, or whatever it might be. We have to, just put all of that aside, right? And focus on the other person and delivering value to them and all of the stuff that you have learned, all the stuff that you will learn to me, and not focus on yourself, right? So the correct time to get all this stuff about you clear and straight is when you are not with other people, right? Evaluate and then consider all the stuff that I'm sharing here when you're not with other people, or when you're not trying to be influential, which I would encourage you never to not try and be influential, assuming that you have something of value to offer. Doesn't mean you always have to be in control. I discourage that attitude. Doesn't mean you always have to be with an agenda. I discourage that. But if nothing else, you might simply be always trying to influence the people around you who you love to feel good. So you're still being an influencer in that way, even if it is very general, right? Rather than just nothing to do with me kind of thing. That's more of a victim kind of thing, right? The whole I don't have any say in that. That's an anti-influential position, and one that I would encourage you not to take when you're with people. So the time to really think about this is when you're not with people, if that makes sense. And if you're always with people, that's probably an issue. Maybe you are a very extroverted person, in which case you want to spend most of your time with people. That's absolutely fine. But I would encourage you to still spend a little bit of time on your own, doing a little bit of self-reflection, a little bit of looking inside. Just as if you're an introverted person, I respect that too. And if you want to spend most of your time alone, that's fine. But I would still encourage you to spend a bit of time with people to have some interaction and some learning and growing and connecting and all of that kind of stuff, right? Okay, so I hope that makes sense, the paradox of influence. The whole how do you put it aside, we'll talk more about that when we really talk about how to influence. It does depend on the particular context, but the number one thing is to have the intent to, right? So to realize, yes, it is important, yes, they are judging me, but If I focus on the fact that they're judging me, they're going to judge me worse. So I just have to let that go. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so a couple of other points. Influencers will tend to treat influence as a game, all right? Now, when I say that, some people talk about treating life as a game as well. I'm not really into that. That's I think things matter. People suffering, people struggling. I don't see that just as a game. I think it's a glib attitude. Taken to its extreme, it's a sociopathic attitude. So I wouldn't say that. However, just in the context of influencing, I would say influencers treat it as a game. But please don't think that I mean that they consider it to be silly or frivolous or no big deal. I'm saying when they treat it as a game, well, it means as important, right? Like when Michael Jordan is playing basketball, for instance, or Tiger Woods is playing golf, they're treating it as a game, right? But that doesn't mean that it's not important to them, right? They're taking it seriously while they're doing it. But here's the key thing. They're able to detach, right? And not take it personally. So afterwards, and I don't know Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods, I'll be honest with you, but I'm just, I know people who are exceptional, and whenever someone's exceptional, this is exactly the attitude that I notice. It's an intense intent and focus, but without attachment to the result. So you want the result, you're driving towards the result, but on a very practical level, what it means is that maybe after a game, or maybe if you're in the middle of a tournament, at the end of the tournament, after the tournament, you can sit around together and all have a drink and laugh and joke, and do you know what I mean? I mean, even and politicians are criticised for this, but like Houses in Parliament, right? You see them up there, Conservatives, Labour, all shouting at each other, jeering, whatever your opinion of politics is, you can at least say that, they don't like each other, even if they are all puppets or all ultimately serving the same system. They don't seem to like each other very much on a day-to-day level, and yet, after that's done, they can all go to the bar and have a few drinks, and do you know what I mean? And then they go back on the campaign trail and then be, attacking each other and slandering each other and trying to outdo each other and all the rest of it. Now, I realise politics isn't a great example of people you want to aspire to, but it just gives the point that even with these things which are serious, where people really, really, really want to win, right? So that's a game where it's really important, you are able to then detach and not take it personally. And so I'd say it's the same with any influence situation, right? So on a very simple level, let's say that you meet someone, you have a conversation with them, whatever it is that you do, you mention that you offer it to them, you have an intent that because this person is suitable, that they take you up on whatever it is, they buy or they show interest, depends, right? And yet, so you do your absolute best, as you would, I would hope, do your absolute best within a game to win. But you're not, if they say no, you're not going to be like a bad loser in a game, Like I remember when I was a kid, I was such a bad loser. I'd be playing Monopoly, and then the moment that I realised I would be about to win, I would pick up the board, throw it on the floor, and run out of the room crying. Now, in all fairness to myself, I was probably about 4 or 5 at the time. I remember because where I was living in Norfolk. So since then I've grown up, and if I lose, it's not ideal, obviously. Like in the middle of the game, I'll be like, oh, damn it. But then, afterwards I'm sitting around, I'm not still thinking, oh, damn, I lost. It's really, unpleasant, painful, bad, right? I can laugh and joke with the person I've just been playing with. And do you see what I mean? So it's a similar thing in the whole influence thing. Now, maybe it isn't quite the best comparison because game, maybe that makes you think of influence as an oppositional thing, whereas of course it's not. But in terms of you versus yourself, maybe more like a game of golf or something like that, where it's really you versus yourself, you trying to beat your previous record. Maybe it's something like that, right? And so, to give you an example of this for me in the real practical world, this is really the way to deal with a rejection, right? Like, did you know that if 96 out of every 100 people who see one of my videos offering one of my coaching programs rejects me, basically, doesn't buy, says no, don't want that, or don't want it enough, that is a massive success for me, right? And yet if I've thought about every person, like, you know, I look for my analytics and I can literally see the person, what their IP address is, what country they come from, you know, all of this stuff. I could, oh, that person from Switzerland, they only watched for 31 seconds and then they left. Oh, I'm really upset about that. God, they rejected me. What does that mean about me as a person? Maybe I'm no good. Maybe my teachers were right. No, you know, it's like, oh, well, there's another one. Another one said no, another one said no, another one said no. Oh, look, one said yes. Oh, that's cool. It's just a game, right? You see? I hope that makes sense. Okay, so next one. Influencers know that each action, right, specifically when I say action, I mean communication, counts, right? It all counts. And so what do I mean by that? So many people, I feel like they act through their life as if things don't count, right? So people trying to lose weight, for instance, and then, you know, they eat something that they know is not going to help them lose weight, and oh, it doesn't count because whatever, you know, BS. Or, you know, people trying to quit having drugs, and maybe this is less, but, you know, especially if it's a minor one, like, I don't know, coffee, oh, you know, coffee doesn't count, you know, it's a weekend or something like that. Or, you know, but I've known people talk about this with all kinds of crazy stuff. Cheating doesn't count if you're on holiday, if you're in another country, if it's only kissing, if whatever, right? It doesn't count. So an influencer knows everything counts, right? Maybe to give a religious perspective, even if no one finds out, God knows, you know, like karma knows, the universe knows. So, and another kind of slogan which I love, which I know Helen likes as well, is the way that you do anything is the way you do everything. That is an influencer quote. There is no, oh, well, you know, yeah, I know it didn't work out because excuse, and I'm not going to count that, right? It all counts. And so this is particularly important in communication, right? The reason why this is an important concept is because a lot of the time, most of us are kind of just doing stuff on autopilot, right? So, you know, your familiar person comes in, your husband, your wife, your mother, your father, your son, your daughter, whatever, and they start talking to you and you're talking to them, and maybe it goes well, maybe it doesn't. But at the end of it, you're like, you know, I didn't, like I wasn't even consciously involved in that conversation. Like, why did I say that? Maybe it's like, oh, why did I say that thing that upset that person? Maybe it's, oh, why did I agree to this thing that I didn't really want to do, right? We weren't really paying attention. We weren't fully there, right? We didn't feel, it didn't count. We felt like it didn't count, right? But it does. So it means to basically be fully engaged and fully involved in everything you're doing. So influencers seek to act with great awareness and intention, right? And these almost sound like kind of spiritual concepts or new age concepts or something like that, right? And I guess they kind of are, you know? My experience has been that, like, my dealings with people who consider themselves to be influencers in some way, they're actually a lot more conscious and aware and do things with intention rather than haphazardly or randomly or unconsciously or automatically than people who profess to be spiritual people or new age people or enlightened people or whatever, right? This is my experience, maybe different from yours, but they pay attention, right? And they do things for a reason. And they don't do things and then later go, oh, what did I do that for? Oh, I have no idea, right? Like they're not asleep at the wheel, right? They're awake. So, and that is what you need to be. That is like, but the great thing is if you're just, you know, attempting to be like awake to be enlightened, that's kind of like a fancy title, which you probably think is going to raise your status, but it's not that compelling in the real world, not on a consistent level for most people anyway. Whereas this, you know, being an influential person, well, you sign up to this course, I imagine you've got your own reasons why, they're going to tend to be quite powerful, right? You know, maybe so I can feed my family, or so I feel like I matter in the world, or these kind of things, which are very, very primal and important, right? And so it's more motivating, I would say, for most real human beings to be kind of awakened, enlightened, or whatever you want to call it, to be more effectively influential rather than to be awakened or enlightened, ironically. So if that all sounds a bit like airy-fairy and like too far off from you, I just mean that you are aware of what's going on, you're aware of what you are doing and the effect that it is having on the other person, and you are paying attention to what you are doing and the other person, and you are doing what you are doing for a reason rather than just, oh, I just found myself doing it. Right? So that's the practical, explanation of what that means. Next, an influencer understands that their state, and what do I mean by state? By state, I'm using a kind of NLP term, but by state I mean kind of a conglomeration of your emotions, so your feelings in your body, your visions in your head, but basically how you feel. I guess that's the kind of simple thing. So influencers understand that how they feel, right, their state, is contagious, right? And so they seek to master theirs. So what do I mean by that? Again, that may sound very theoretical, not very practical. Let's bring that down to, the real world. So, for instance, let's say you have a very obviously influency jobs, like you're meant to sell stuff to people all day, right? If you feel like miserable and depressed and futile and the world is meaningless and despair and, what is the point? You take that feeling to work with you, and then you do your best to drag yourself, like to go through the motions of saying what you're meant to say anyway. Hi, would you be interested in, no, never mind, but you try, right? You go through the motions, you say the words, you even maybe try and do the vocal tonality, but your heart isn't in it. It tends to go poorly. The reason is because it's not so much about the words. This is like the classic thing in the world of seduction for guys. It's like a pickup line. Just tell me the words to say to get the girl, right? But of course, the words are almost irrelevant. It's the state that you bring into it, right? And exactly ditto the other way around as well for a woman seducing a man. If she comes in, all miserable and all the rest of it, then it's extremely unseductive, unattractive. And the reason is maybe partly because the other person is judging you for how you feel, but much more importantly and much more primarily, it's because the way you feel is contagious. And you know who the way you feel is especially contagious too? Well, I'm not quite sure if I said that right, but basically, the person who you're most likely to be infected, as it were, by their bad feeling is someone who you perceive to be in the same tribe as you. You're paying attention to them, and you perceive them to be higher status than you, right? You're really going to mirror that person. Your mirror neurons, that's the mirror neurons are the scientific explanation for that, your feelings or status contagious thing, right? So you're really going to feel what that other person is feeling. That's really, really important. And so influencers are aware of that. So what it means is, and so therefore they seek to master their state, right? And so I just want to clarify that, master their state, and it's more than just pretending, right? Now, even I think kind of purely my experience opinion, most NLP people don't quite get this. They think it's about kind of trying to manufacture a state within them. But I would personally, this is my personal, perspective on it. I would personally say, for instance, if you do feel like great sorrow and great despair and futility and all the rest of it, it's not quite as simple as, like listen to a happy song, watch a happy movie. It might be, right? And if it is, great. Like if okay, you're all miserable, life is meaningless, and then you start listening to a song and you start humming along and singing and dancing, and then now you actually feel good about life and you feel good about the world again. Okay, great, right? That's fantastic. You've shifted your state. Now you're feeling good again, and you'll transmit that feeling, infect that other person with that feeling of feeling good. Great. If that doesn't work though, if it kind of only works temporarily and then you go back into this misery, right? And you have to lift yourself up, but you go back into it. Then I would say that it's more than just kind of forcing yourself out of the bad state, certainly uninfluential state, don't need brackets for that one. If you try and force yourself out of that like unpleasant feeling, uninfluential state, but you end up going right back there, then you're not really resolving the root thing. And so, what might be involved in resolving the root thing? I don't know. It might be talking about how you're feeling with someone. Usually that isn't enough, but if you never do that, then that might be something. And of course for women, that is more of an important factor, certainly. And ditto for men, just having a bit of quiet space to yourself without interruption and just being able to rest. That might be kind of like the male equivalent to that. Either of those things I think are more kind of temporary salves though. Like the real root thing probably is going to be to, especially again, I'm talking about like a deep kind of a negative thing that kind of persists and you can't just shift out of, or that keeps coming back. you're probably going to need to dig into your body. You're going to need to pull that negativity out. Maybe you're going to need to do some detoxing of your physical body. You're going to need to, detox your energy channels, your meridians. You're going to need to cry and bawl your eyes out, probably in the case of futility. Maybe actually there's some anger behind you, and you're going to need to, hit some pillows, punch some punching bags, whatever it might be. But you need to resolve it, is kind of what I'm getting at here, right? And I'm not going to talk about how to resolve it here, because that's not what this is about. I do loads of stuff on that. But yeah, you're going to need to really resolve the root issue. So that's the only difference, I would say. It's not just about, plastering on a happy smile and just about managing to pretend, that you feel good. I will acknowledge, though, that it does kind of work, like a bit, So if the three options were, so you wake up feeling despair and depressed and you have to go into your sales job, right? If the three options are either A, stay exactly as you were, B, do your best to plaster on a feeling good, even if it's only temporary, or C, resolve the root issue, B does work a lot better than A, right? So going and just like temporarily trying to kind of force yourself out of it, even if it's a fairly superficial way, does work more. But there will be incongruence, right? So in that case, what will happen is the person will be like, I kind of feel good listening to this person, and yet I also kind of feel bad, because you're feeling both. So they feel both from you, right? And so I'm not sure I quite trust that person. And they seem to be saying happy things in a happy way, and yet, there's something about, the way they're saying some things, or the way that their body language is, or something that's indicating to me that actually, that they wish that their life was over, or they think that life is a hollow joke, or whatever it might be, right? Which is undermining that happy, optimistic kind of messaging. So it's better than nothing, but much better is to really get in there and deal with the underlying thing. I hope that makes sense. And then kind of last point here before we get into the main meat of the training. Influencers know the importance of who controls the frame. So what does this mean? I'm just going to give an introduction to this concept, and then I encourage you, if you want to learn more about it, dig into NLP, where we can go into almost endless depth with this whole issue. And I'm going to give you, a practical example. So now you may think I've just recently read a book on NLP because of the fact I keep kind of mentioning it here, but actually I haven't in years, or listened to anything or read anything. It's just relevant to influence. That's why it's going in this particular case. Anyway, so frame. So I'm going to tell you what a frame is by example. So for instance, I know a lot of people who are going to be watching this are going to be people who want to offer a service of some kind, right? Let's say health coaching. So the challenge with a lot of offering your services of any kind, let's say as a health coach, are that the person you're offering it to has a particular frame, and you buy into their frame. And then once you are, or if you're already pre-bought into their frame, or once you buy into their frame, your attempts to influence them, that you will be able to help them with your coaching, are likely to be unsuccessful. What am I talking about specifically? Well, most people might have a frame of money is a scarce and valuable resource. I have it and you don't. What you have is a ubiquitous resource. Lots of people are offering it, and it has very little value, right? Or maybe it has no value. Like, what, I'm going to pay money to spend time on the phone with you? What would I do that for, right? So that might be their frame at the start. And that's okay, by the way. I mean, it's ideal to have people who don't have a frame like that as your leads, your potential clients in this example. But if you limit yourself to only people who get it beforehand, you're going to limit yourself too much, probably. So it's fair enough that people start with that frame, right? Now you, as a person offering the services, need to have a great amount of strength and clarity around the frame that money is a incredibly abundant and ubiquitous resource that is like everywhere. There's like countless trillions of dollars. What I am offering in my services and the results that I can deliver to you are a scarce and valuable resource, on the other hand. And rather than you deciding if I'm good enough for you, I am actually deciding if I want to trade my valuable resource, which is my time, energy, and focus, for your fairly abundant and I could get it anywhere resource, which is money, right? So do you see what I mean? So that's, there's an actual term for that in influence called flipping the script, right? In case you want to know a little bit of jargon. But basically, do you see? So those are two different frames, right? One frame is that your service is, very ubiquitous and therefore low in value. What I have is scarce and therefore high in value. You basically have an exact opposite frame. What you have, this money thing, is a very ubiquitous resource. It's everywhere. What I have, this very specific, ability to get a result, is very, very rare and valuable resource. And therefore, if anything, I'm going to see if you're good enough rather than the other way around, right? So here's the thing. Whenever two people with different frames meet, especially if they're fundamentally different frames, now this is going to sound a little bit Darwinian, but if both frames coexist, there's going to be tension, and in the end, like either the people are going to go their separate ways, and when I say in the end, that will be usually within a few minutes, right? Or one is going to basically one person is going to take on the frame of the other person, right? So the way I learned this from Tony Robbins, good old Tony Robbins, as I started to refer to him, is that when two people get together, whoever, and assuming that they have connection and rapport with each other, right? And so what does that mean in the real world, right? We talked about it. It means that there's oxytocin flowing, right? It means that they trust you. It means that you feel like they're in the same tribe as you and vice versa, right? So assuming that's the case, then, and yet you have two different frames, so we're both from the same tribe, but I think money is the scarce resource, and you think that, offering a lot of value is the scarce, you think that your service is the scarce resource. Whenever there's a clash of frames like that, it's whoever is the most certain about the accuracy and validity, the most clear and the most certain about the accuracy and validity of their frame, will tend to eventually, sooner or later, and we're going to aim for sooner with this, right, influence the other person, right? So what does that mean? So what that means on a very practical level is, so if you get into a potential enrollment conversation with a potential client, and you are not that sure that what you have to offer is a scarce and valuable resource, and what they have to offer is a very ubiquitous and easy to find resource, if you're not that sure of that, then their frame is probably going to win, or you are going to end up being influenced by their frame, right? You have to be more certain, right? Now, that kind of almost sounds like winning or losing, and it's not. I would encourage you not to see it that way, because then it seems like and this is a little bit what I noticed with NLP again, this is only my personal judgment, but where kind of with people in NLP, you can always see every conversation is kind of a battle to them, or they're always trying to control the frame. I personally find this a little bit tedious. It's not the way I like to do. So I don't do that. What I do is what I've said here. I seek the best possible frame in any communication. And because truth and accuracy are very important to me, I just want the most accurate frame, right? So when I'm having a conversation with a person, even if it's an influencing conversation, I'm not always trying to get my frame to win or get them to see things my way. I'm just trying to clarify what is most accurate. That's the way that I would see it, right? And so I'm open to being influenced. I'm open to being won over if the other person's frame is better than mine, in the sense of being more useful and more accurate, right? So, but if I'm talking to someone, I honestly believe, to me, it's an obvious empirical fact that there are trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, pounds, euros, whatever, in the world, and there's only one me, right? To me, those seem like facts. So to me, my position is obviously true. So I'm not trying to win and beat the other person's frame if I were in that kind of conversation. I would just be attempting to help the other person see the truth of this better, more accurate frame. Does that make sense, right? And so that is the way I would really, and if it were a situation where, okay, well, in general, my services are more valuable than money, but in this particular person's situation, I can see how, because they have a great scarcity of money, and maybe they do actually need their money more than they need my services, in which case, fair enough. I'm open to being convinced if that's the case. And if it is the case, fair enough. I won't, don't buy my services, no problem, right? So I'm not always trying to win. I'm not always trying to beat the other person. I'm not always trying to get them to see things my way, but I'm always trying to discover the best possible frame in the context and help the other person discover it, right? And so that is a way that I'm viewing life. I hope that makes sense to you. I hope that's something that you can model. So what frame are we seeing freaks from? Now, I could get very deep into this. I'm not going to. At least, maybe we'll go into this more in the calls if you want. But one other thing that I'll say is that most frames are presuppositions that we don't even realize, right? And so when I say that an influencer is always trying to seek the best possible frame in any communication, what's implied, the presupposition in that very statement, is that you even know that there is a frame to be questioned or improved upon, right? So, again, just to make that really, really practical, so it's not so theoretical, maybe it never occurred to you to question an inner belief that money is a more valuable resource than your services, right? Like, you've always just had that as well, of course. Like, it's not like it's right, it's just that you haven't even thought about it, It was just an assumed thing, right? For me, I'll give you an example, like recently in my life, I've come to question the presupposition, the frame of it's good to be self-sufficient, right? This is something that was like really ingrained in me. Like being young, like my dad had his own like organic garden and stuff like that, and he was into living off the land and all that kind of thing, and it's fine. That has its certain validity and accuracy and all the rest of it. But I just had this basic idea, like it's better to grow your own lettuce in your own garden than to buy lettuce off someone else. Let's use that as a very practical example, right? Now I've kind of just questioned that as a frame. I'm like, well, is that the case? Like if someone else specializes in growing really amazing quality organic lettuce, isn't it kind of better for me to buy that from them? Like for me to exchange that value with them? Like why should I be trying to do it all myself? It's not realistic for me to do it all myself. I probably, like if I were to limit myself to only like consuming that which I grew myself, for instance, or caught myself, or hunted myself, or foraged myself, or whatever, is that improving the quality of my life? I don't believe that it is, personally. If I were to limit myself in all kinds of ways to only what I can produce myself. Anyway, I don't want to go too much into a debate about that. I haven't even 100%, definitely decided to change my mind about that one. The point is that I had a presupposition that of a frame, right? So that my frame was self-sufficiency is a good thing, and it should be aspired to, and it should be worked towards, right? And that was unquestioned in me. I didn't even consider that might be inaccurate, right? You might have a frame of, money is more valuable than my service or my product, right? But is it accurate? Well, maybe it hadn't even occurred to you to question it, right? So in any communication, and that includes the communication in your own head, but as we're talking about influence here, especially in your communication with other people, question frames, right? And try and find the best possible frame. Question, don't make wrong, right? So if someone comes to you with a frame, let's use a non-money one, like someone comes to you with a frame like, it's okay to eat sugary snacks while trying to lose weight, right? That's their frame, okay? So maybe we want to reframe them on that actually, sugar leads to all kinds of things that make it very difficult or impossible to lose weight, right? So that's a reframe for that person. Not to make their frame wrong, just to give them a better one, right? Help them see a better, maybe more accurate frame. Now, let's look at the 4 most important qualities to take on as an influencer. Before I get into that though, I just want to add that all 10 qualities that I gave in the qualities of a wealthy person, or was it 11 qualities that I gave in the being a wealthy person training, I think it was module 4 of that core training, are completely applicable to this too, right? So being, resourceful and being present and all of that kind of stuff, all the stuff that I already covered there is totally accurate here as well. I was going to go through that exact same list and repeat it, but I thought, you know what? I'm not going to, waste your time like that. I'm not going to repeat myself. Please go and revisit that list, right? And the reason is because that list, as I said at the time, is really a list of qualities that it takes to be successful at anything, right? And it's definitely the list of qualities that it takes to be successful as an influencer. However, I've highlighted for you 4 specific ones that are specific, and I must admit, up until now, we've talked in influence in extremely broad general terms, right? We haven't even limited ourselves to only sales or only helping people. We've even talked about, converting people to a religion or seducing them or managing them or leading them, all kinds of things, right? To try and keep it as general as possible. These qualities that I have, so that you can see the universal aspects of influence, right? These qualities that I specifically selected for you here are probably most relevant to you as a person who wants to help people with your product or service, right? So I've honed down a little bit here to, these are not necessarily the qualities that you need to, get someone to join your cult or jump into bed with you, although they, generally probably be helpful. But they are definitely what's required to be the very best at being able to provide a valuable, ethical service or product to someone to help with their health or well-being, right? So that's why I've chosen them specifically here. So we're going to look at, and of course, you might have kind of caught a glance at these by now, and they may be familiar to you, right? And if they are, they should be. And that's because these are the qualities that I actually encouraged you to focus on and then rate yourself on in the very, very first part of this training, right? I asked yourself to give you a rating, I asked you to give yourself a rating between 0 and 10 or 1 and 10, one or the other, for all 4 of these qualities for 30 days, right? I want you to really start paying attention to these and evaluating them, see what increased them or reduced them in you, all of that kind of thing, right? So hopefully these qualities are not unfamiliar to you, and so therefore I will not have to spend too long explaining them. I hope what is, clear to you now is why I said those qualities above and beyond. I could have said so many things other than this. I could have said being happy and joyful, and I wish it were a key thing in influencing, but it's not. Or I wish I said being peaceful. But I wish I could say it's a key thing in being influential, but frankly, it's just not, right? So I'm giving you the things that actually are, and especially in the type of influence that I think you're going to be doing in the real world, right? So whether that's, coaching, teaching people from stage, helping people, help people by getting into, consumer product or something like that, right? So whether that's a course or a supplement or a herb or a service or a massage or whatever, right? So what we've got here is we've got the surface appearance. So this is how it actually is going to appear to the other person. Then I'm going to tell you what is the inner root of it, right? Which isn't always the same thing, right? So the surface appearance of the inner root of kindness on the outside isn't actually necessarily kindness inside, right? So we're going to look at that. What is the inner root of it? So in terms of you being able to display that out there, what do you need to develop in here, right? That's what we're going to look at. And then we'll also look at what neurochemicals are stimulated in the other person, not in you, in the other person with each of these 4 behaviors, so that you'll see exactly why they are so important and why I've considered them to be the keys of influencing people. So let's go through them one at a time. The first one is kindness, right? I've also added in nice, friendly. We could even use words like caring, compassionate, but compassionate maybe is a little bit too much a heavy overtone. I mean a nice, light, not scary, smiley, kind of demeanor, right? So that's what's going on the outside. That's an influential thing. And the reason for this is that the other person really needs to believe that you care about them, right? That's absolutely crucial, and it's above and beyond anything else. So it's more important than the fact that you are confident, or it's more important than the fact that your product and service really is awesome, and it's more important than how much you know, and all that stuff that you think is important. Most important thing is that, are you going to listen to someone or buy from someone who it's clear to you that they don't care about you, or that even, not that they hate you maybe, but just that they're indifferent to you and your hopes and dreams and struggles and plight? No, of course not, nor would anyone ever. And I'm also not going to jump into bed with you, and I'm also not going to join your religion, and I'm also going to be, at best passive aggressive, at worst actively rebellious and refuse to do what you say if you're my manager, and etc., right? If you don't care about me, I ain't going along with your program. It's as simple as that, and ideally I'm just going to completely ignore you, right? Maybe not possible if it's your boss, but certainly possible if it's an advertiser or someone offering some kind of product or service to you, right? Which is probably why you're learning this. So, really, really, really important They need to feel like you care about them. Now, why? Let's look at the neurochemical stimulated next. What would you guess, right? So if your surface appearance, this is what they see, it's got a genuine inner root, which we'll cover in a minute, it's not pretending. So what neurochemicals would you say that's stimulated in someone, right? So the first and most important that I would say is serotonin. Now, why serotonin, right? You probably thought niceness, kindness, compassion. It sounds like oxytocin, doesn't it? And yeah, it is oxytocin too. If you feel like the other person genuinely cares about you, it will give you a warm, fuzzy feeling. You will feel like you can trust them and you will feel connected to them. But why serotonin? Well, it's very simple. If you feel like someone cares about you, especially if that person is high status, which we'll cover in a second, which we already talked about earlier as well, right? Then that means just the fact they're paying attention to you at all elevates your status if you feel like they're in the same tribe as you and they're high status, right? If they care about your well-being, that's a massive elevation of status, right? So it's a big serotonin boost, this is like, so if you see like a Tony Robbins infomercial, ran for 10 years, I believe he's a deeply caring person just because I don't think it's possible to fake what he does as well as he does it, right? And so, he gets up on stage, for 10 years, same infomercial. Hi, I'm Tony Robbins, just looks like an alpha in every sense, acts like an alpha in every sense, right? And I care about you and your well-being. How does that make me feel? This, good-looking 6'8", obvious alpha giant, telling me that he cares about me and how I feel, right? Or this highly authoritative, person, or this deeply compassionate and therefore not self-absorbed and therefore high-status person, whatever it might be, right? How does that make me feel? It makes me feel good. It makes me feel like I'm worth something, like I'm special, like I'm significant, like I matter. It makes me feel serotonin, all right? And of course, if the serotonin and oxytocin being stimulated, then we have less cortisol as well, right? Less of a feeling there's something wrong, more a feeling of trust, connection, safety, feeling special, feeling important, feeling like you matter, right? Fantastic. This, I would say, arguably, is the most important quality. By the way, I'm not just saying these because these are like what I think or because this is how I see myself or what I think is more important. I don't think I'm amazingly good at that, although I think I'm good enough, but I think often I don't convey, because of my kind of stern tone and stuff like that, I don't convey enough how much I actually care. A lot of people, when they meet me and spend time with me, they're like, oh wow, you're a lot more caring or compassionate than I thought you were. I'm like, So it doesn't come across immediately. So I'm not saying this because I think this is me. I'm saying this because I think it's important, because it matters, because I know it's the most important thing, right? So I would say, arguably, this is the most important factor. This one's really important as well. We're going to talk about it in a second, right? But if a person's got all this going on, but they don't care about you, who cares, right? It doesn't matter, right? Unless you have no choice. Like if you're a prisoner, maybe then or you're like a student at school and you can't escape or whatever. Maybe it matters, but otherwise, I don't care. I don't care about you, what you have to say, what you think, if you don't care about me. That's our bottom line, and rightly so, right? So what's the inner root of that surface appearance of kind, nice, friendly, caring? Well, simple. It's basically caring. This one is not a trick question. It's basically that you actually care, right? There's no getting around this one. There's no faking it. However, if you feel a lack of caring in the traditional sense of caring, realize curiosity is actually enough, especially to get started, right? Because it's hard to genuinely care about a stranger. It's great. It's certainly something we should be moving towards in our evolution, right? But a hardwired, basic operating system, as we've talked about in detail now, is that unless I really feel like I know them, I don't care about them, right? So how do you overcome that hurdle? At least you want to have curiosity, right? And which comes across as caring because it is, right? You still care enough to be interested in them. That's the point, right? No one expects you to sacrifice your life for them when they don't even know you, right? But just the fact, that's a nice hat, or where are you from, or and maybe not where are you from, because a lot of people say that when they don't actually care at all, but any kind of genuine curiosity, any genuine, I want to find out more about you, I'm interested in you, will, come across as this and stimulate these things in people, right? So if maybe you're having a little bit of sympathy fatigue, I know the kind of person who signs up for my courses often, is a very caring person, but as a result of that, the kind of people take advantage of them. Maybe eventually they get a bit of, tired of caring for people all the time. So even if you're not in a caring mood, you can at least be in a curious mood, right? Like a friendly curiosity, not a hostile interrogation curiosity, but hey, what are you doing here, or not what you're doing here. It kind of depends on the context, right? So let's use the car salesman, idea again. So you come in and, person's looking at a BMW. Have you driven a BMW before? I mean, it's obviously a self-serving question. You're trying to get them to buy something, but it's also showing some interest in the other person if they respond. Yeah, my brother had one. Oh, really? What type? And slowly this person's actually interested in me. They actually care about me, right? So curiosity can be enough to start that off. And not only can it be enough, it's not like you're faking it. Curiosity often leads to caring, right? Because eventually you're going to be like, oh, your sister's from Arkansas? My sister's from Arkansas. Which bit? And then, whoa, you're in genuine caring now because you kind of feel like you're a part of the same tribe. The oxytocin is flowing for you too, right? So that's often the kind of root to it, the inner root within you that will come across as this. Okay, so next, the surface appearance, powerful, right? Confident, decisive, high status, basically, right? So the surface appearance, powerful, certain, right? And yeah, so decisive, able to make decisions, basically alpha, male or female, right? That's the surface appearance. So why is this so important? I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I'll expand it a little bit more. So basically the reason it's important is because most people feel insecure, right? Most people feel low status, to use a more kind of accurate terminology. Most people feel low status, and most people feel high anxiety, high cortisol, like there's something wrong. And they feel like there are no leaders around who they can like, respect, and trust, right? Which is, serotonin and oxytocin, right? Like and trust. Like, respect, and trust. So, if you have, this is why I said this one's more important, but if they feel like you care about them and you're an alpha person, right, that's going to make them feel awesome, right? But also there's the thing about feeling like, oh, at last I can relax because there is a leader around, right? What we are desperately, desperately low on in this time more than any other, and again, I'm not like a doomsayer, as you know, I feel like, in many ways, our world now, as imperfect as it is better than it ever has been, as far as we know about anyway, in recorded, any kind of evidence of recorded history. And yet, one of the challenges is that, so there's all sorts of benefits to the breakup of the old tribal system that I've talked about before. One of the detriments is that we don't have a clear leader anymore, right? And we don't feel like we're up to the task, usually. People rarely do. And so for the vast majority of people, and even people who are leaders, powerful CEOs of companies and politicians and all the rest of it, most people who are in a highly, high status position, kind of secretly feel scared that they're not good enough, that they're going to be found out, like that they're frauds, all of this kind of thing. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you know that, but there's a lot of that going on. So it's very, 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 very few people who genuinely feel high status, genuinely feel high status. Not like they're getting away with something or something like that, right? So almost everyone, there's very few exceptions, but not many. So almost everyone, when you're talking to them, even if they've got a big ego, got a chip in their shoulder, got a God complex, say like an MD or a lawyer or something like that, still usually there's this underlying insecurity, right? So almost everyone is looking for a leader to follow, even if it's the last thing that they want to admit to you or last thing they want to admit to themselves on a conscious level. The proof of that, though, in case you're, well, that's your opinion now, and how do you back that up? You're probably not going to say that because I've established my authority with you, but I'm going to ask these questions anyway. I'm going to question myself on your behalf. So, you know, what about, you know, what are your, what's your proof of that? My proof of that is the outrageous amount of people who should know better, who follow people who are outrageously, blatantly full of shit in the world. And there are so many. And, you know, if you're a student of influence, I would say you also need to be a student of the bad influence, right? Kind of, I think a famous quote by Hitler, yeah, another Nazi reference, I know. But I think it's important, right? Because it is one of the most despicable things that like ever happened in human history, and we've got to ask ourselves, not just like condemn it, but why? How did that manage to happen, right? One of the famous quotes from him is that the German people were like children, and they needed a strong father figure to lead them. Now look at the guy. He's like a little guy, dark hair, silly Charlie Chaplin moustache, manages to get like at least tens of millions of people to join his cause, like, you know, genocide against the whole race, all of this stuff, you know, by talking about an Aryan super race, which he's obviously not even a part of, you know. If it weren't so, if the real life consequences weren't so horrific, it would be farcical, right? It would be ridiculous. And yet it happened. How could such a thing happen? How could it happen? Right? It's because of the thing I just talked about. If any of you have done your bonus reading and read Robert Cialdini, looked at the 6 laws of influence, you'll remember him saying that, you know, arguably there are 2 which are the most powerful, one or the other. One is social proof, right? Which is the, if everyone else is doing it, it must be right, basically, in a nutshell, a type of influence. And then the other one is authority, right? And the classic kind of scientific study that backs this up is the tests where someone was instructed by an authority figure, a scientist in a white coat, to push a button which he thought was, or she thought was torturing another person in a different room, and the other person's begging and screaming, please stop, and even once they're dead, you know, a large amount of people will still shock them anyway. What does that indicate? What does that indicate to you? What it indicates to me is that we are living in a society full of people who feel very low status, even sometimes the people who've got high status, who are desperate to be led, right? So, that's the reality. Now, what can we do about that? Number one, we can say, oh, isn't it terrible? People should know better, blah, 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 right? Bullshit, doesn't really help, right? Or, number two, we can step up and be that leader that actually isn't full of shit, isn't looking to, you know, harm people, exploit people, you know, whatever, you know, fulfill some nefarious agenda to ruin the world or commit genocide or anything like that. Actually be a good leader, right? Be a leader who's actually helping other people and the world as well as themselves, yeah, because we're not talking about being a martyr, right? So it's a win-win-win. You win, you the leader win, everyone who you're leading wins because you're leading them towards a better life in some way, whether you're helping them to be more healthy or whatever, right? And the world wins because you're doing it in a way that's, you know, high integrity and respectful of your environment, etc., etc. That's an awesome situation, right? So, I guess that is a bit of a diatribe, but get back to the point. So, in terms of this surface appearance, based on everything I've just said, what neurochemicals are being stimulated if the other person is perceiving you as being these things: powerful, confident, decisive, basically high status. So have a guess. What do you think? And I'm going to write down the first one. The most important factor is actually simply less cortisol, right? Less anxiety. That's really the main thing. I would also add in that it actually stimulates some GABA, right? Even though I don't have any scientific backing for that one, I'll admit, unlike the other ones. But because there was very little research I could find on GABA in relation to behavior, although there's plenty in relation to its pharmacology and nutrition and stuff like that. But basically, on a practical level, what we're talking about is when people feel like, okay, there's someone here who's a leader who I can trust, they feel less cortisol, they feel less anxiety, less of a feeling there's something wrong, they feel they can calm down and relax at last, and therefore they feel more of a sense of peace, right? More of a sense of, okay, everything is okay with the world, right? I can relax, basically. And then, of course, yeah, to some degree, like we've just talked about, oxytocin, right? I can trust, I can feel safer, right? So that goes hand in hand with it as well. And then of course this plus this leads to serotonin, right? Although just being with someone on its own, powerful, confident, doesn't necessarily lead to serotonin, but just the fact that you have this other person focusing on you, especially if they're high status, it's going to give you lots of serotonin. So that's how it would kind of map across. And so what's the inner root of that, right? What's the inner root of feeling high status? The inner root of feeling high status is actually not like feeling confident again. It wasn't like a trick question. It is actually something different. The inner root of feeling high status, in my experience and in my observation, is the feeling of feeling free, right? This is certainly empirically obvious if you consider it in people's behavior. If you take a classic tribe, the person whose behavior is the least free is the lowest status member of the group. Like before they can do anything, they got to check, right? To go back to that simple conversation about serotonin, right? Like they've got to check in with every other member of the tribe before they grab the food, right? The alpha one at the top, they just grab it. They're free to act, right? Ditto with mating, right? And again, not condoning rape of any kind, even primate or mammal, but they are free to act, right? Basically, and assuming the other person is consensual and all the rest of it, right? But they feel free, right? They don't, oh, do I need to check around? Are more powerful males going to beat the hell out of me? Or in the case of women, are more powerful females going to beat the hell out of me if I, step out of my place, right? Most people, there's something called the tallest poppy syndrome, I believe. This idea of, don't stick out too much, don't be too, good in any way, too special, too unique, or you'll get cut down. You know who feels that way? Everyone except for alpha people. Alpha people don't care because they don't feel afraid, right? They feel free, okay? So that's the inner root of that. So I would say if you want to be this, if you want to be powerful, high status and all the rest of it, aim to feel free deep inside, right? However, again, I'll put this in order for a reason. People who just aim for their own personal freedom without this, caring about other people, well, on a very primate level again, what happens eventually is if they just go around like being free to indulge in all their, appetites without any thought or caring for the rest of the tribe, they are rightly, often in primates, murdered in mafia kind of execution style often, or banished basically. I'm laughing, I can't remember exactly the research, but there was something about a bunch of chimps basically taking in pushing it too far, alpha, and murdering mafia style, which I thought was hilarious, simply because the description of it. But yeah, so that's usually the case. And in human society, it's kind of similar. Like if we look at what happened to Colonel Gaddafi recently, I mean, even as kind of dictators or tyrants go, he really kind of pushed it. Famous movie The Dictator by Sacha Baron Cohen, great rise up of Colonel Gaddafi, and a lot of the most outrageous things in that movie were apparently based on real life. And so eventually, everyone else kind of took him and ripped him apart in a very physical way. Now, I'm not one to condone violence, but you kind of see why, right? When they're living in poverty and struggling just to survive, and this person is I'm not going to get into politics, but you're going to get the point, right? It's not cool, is it? So obviously not free without this, but free with this as a primary thing, right? So free with the heart will lead you to feel more and more powerful, more and more alpha, more high status. So rather than aiming to be powerful, high status, I would say aim to feel free inside yourself, and then confidence and power and status and that, just a natural, oh, I'm just free. Well, I'll just say whatever I kind of want. I'm not going to, not care about you, but I'm also not going to hold myself back and not, just for your benefit, right? That's the kind of the tricky thing to navigate. And so when you do that, what tends to happen is you will kind of generally piss off and possibly, be alienated by various alphas of other groups, and you'll probably end up having to have your own group. And that's kind of the high status thing, right? And not necessarily going to be the case. Maybe, once you have your own group, you form, alliances and friendships with other alphas from other groups. And and that's just kind of the game of, you know, how this goes. But it comes, and this is really important, right? So the desire for money's own sake, often is kind of the road to ruin, even though there's nothing wrong with money, it's only neutral, right? But it's because, yeah, it's not the thing to actually aim for, right? And I'd say it's the same with power, right? Don't aim for power, aim for freedom, right? Freedom with a heart, and then you will probably accrue power, right, as a result of that. Next, authenticity, right? So authenticity, this could be honesty, trustworthiness, realness, to use an urban term. I'm laughing. I remember when I was 19, I met a group of white kids in Crawley kind of suburbs who thought that they were into Tupac Shakur and stuff like that, and they were listening to this music. I didn't like it at the time. I was like, don't like that. And this girl goes up to me and she goes, "What's the matter? Too real for ya?" Which made me laugh because she was like a 19-year-old privileged upper middle class blonde girl. But anyway, realness, indeed, realness. So authenticity. I'm kind of making a joke there, right? Now, don't get me wrong, right? Like, by all means, do whatever is real for you, right? And if real for you is acting like you're from a culture that you're not from, or acting like you're from a part of the world that you're not from, or whatever it might be, if it feels true in your heart, fair enough, right? I just want to, I just made a joke, like say the truth about it, right? So the reason why within authenticity, so authenticity is not, like holding yourself only to what other people feel is the real you. It's what you feel deep down in your heart of hearts is the real you, right? Your truth, your inner sense of what's real, what's true, what's right for you, right? And so that comes across as being authentic, right? And that means that you're an honest person, that means you're a trustworthy person. Why is this so important? Why have I highlighted this as one of the 4 crucial qualities? Basically because it's that thing about trust again, right? So I'm not going to even listen to you unless I sense that you care about me, but if you care about me, but there's something like you're not 100% authentic, you're kind of pretending in some way, or maybe there's some inner conflict in you that you haven't resolved, like the example I said earlier about, all smiles on the surface, but really kind of depressed, whatever it might be. You're not being real, you're not being true to yourself. This means that I can't trust you. So the number one thing here is about trust again, and so therefore oxytocin. There's a very obvious practical example of this that you'll probably relate to with my stuff. I think one of the reasons why people like me and buy my stuff is for this one, because they feel that I'm being authentic, right? Even some that don't like me, A lot of people who end up being my clients said, when I first came across you, I thought you were a bit arrogant, or I thought you were a bit confrontational or a bit challenging or whatever it might be. But then eventually I thought, maybe he's kind of confident for a reason, and I decided to give you a go. I've heard that quite a lot, right? That's not ideal, obviously, either, although I guess, it could be worse. But the point is, whatever it might be, so in this case, maybe slightly over the toply, confidently, but I was real, right? And so that's what matters. I was real, I was true to myself, okay? A lot of people think, I had a conversation with someone fairly recently, who might be watching this, who thought that because they had better production value on the videos that they were creating, that they would be worth more money. And I just laughed, I was like, far from the truth. Probably the reality is it doesn't matter. If anything, having your videos seem like, now you can go too far with this, right? If it's so bad that they can't see you properly or they can't hear what you're saying, that's not good. But if you think it has to be like a Hollywood movie in terms of crystal clear and lots of different camera angles and beautiful backgrounds and all that kind of thing, the truth is overproduced videos, in the internet world anyway, it's a bit different on TV, overproduced videos tend to not do as well. Go to YouTube, not music videos and stuff, I guess, which are actually the most watched videos, but in terms of what we're doing, how-to information, health information, wellness, all of that kind of thing. Go and look up something random, how to have less anxiety, or how to eat better, or I don't know. And you'll see that amazingly, a lot of the most popular videos, most views, actually have poor production values, right? Like really poor. And a lot of the time, even, in my opinion anyway, the person speaking is not very interesting. Like they're not presenting particularly well. How is this possible? Especially with the latter point to me. But I realize what it is. It's because it seems authentic. And because it is authentic, right? It's real. The more slick and overproduced and, like no rough edges something is, the less we trust it almost, right? And so therefore it comes across as less authentic, and therefore our trust goes down, right? So this is a very real issue in all kinds of ways. Being real, being authentic, being true to yourself is a absolutely key thing, because it means that people feel like they can trust you. Another really important aspect of authenticity is that you have to genuinely believe in the value of the product or service, or if you're talking about something else, well, whatever, the products you're offering, right? We're talking about seduction, you have to believe that you, in terms of the product or the sexual experience with you, is of value, right? Or if you're talking about a religion, you have to believe that your religion or cult has real value to the other person. If you're talking about management, you have to believe that the instructions of what you're asking the other person, the employee, to do has real value. Whatever it might be, you have to believe that it has real value for the other person. If you don't believe it, they're not going to believe it, right? And so that's down to that authenticity thing, right? You can fake it. People kind of believe you, but you'll have mediocre, lackluster results at best if you get everything else right, right? You need to be an authentic person, and you need to authentically, genuinely believe in the value of what you have to offer. I've helped a lot of people, by the way, over the years with trying to get their stuff out there and stuff like that. And I've consistently noticed this is the number one factor in whether they succeed or not, is whether they truly believe. When I say truly believe, I mean, would they spend money on it? All right, in the case that we're talking about money, right? And if the answer is no, then their appeals to get someone else to spend money on it are unlikely to be successful. It's really as simple as that, right? So this is a really important thing to get dialed in. So oxytocin, obviously the main thing with this authenticity. And then also, again, we're talking about less cortisol, right? Less fear. Oh, I can actually trust you. You're an honest person. My level of anxiety about, my communication with you goes down. And now, in terms of the specific thing I said there about authentic belief in the value of what you have to offer, so I'll put it in brackets, but about that point specifically, that stimulates a lot of dopamine, right? As soon as I trust, like that the other person authentically, genuinely believes in whatever it is that they're selling, right? So whatever it is they're trying to influence you about, if they believe that it's genuinely the best thing, if they would do it themselves if they were in your place, ideally if they have done it themselves, that's not always applicable, then that makes you want it a hell of a lot more. Now the inner root of that, what appears on the outside, is authenticity, honesty, trustworthiness. I struggle to find the exact word for that, but I've decided to call it self-honoring, right? By which I mean and include self-love and self-respect, right? So, and specifically, so you love, respect, appreciate, and accept yourself as you are. That's the key thing, right? And when you do that, when you love and appreciate and care for and accept yourself as you are, then you can be yourself in the world, you can be true to yourself, and that comes across as this authenticity, honesty, trustworthiness, which then stimulates these feelings in people, right? But you have to start with that self-honoring, right? That respect and love and appreciation and, self-acceptance. Self-acceptance is good, and it might be a good starting place, but I go to more than that. Like self-honoring to me is beyond self-acceptance. I'm not just like I'm not just tolerating myself, right? I'm honoring myself, And A lot of us are afraid of this because we're afraid it might be arrogance or hubris or whatever, and it's not what I mean. I don't mean that, it's not thinking that you're better than anyone else or anything like that. We're going to talk more about that in a minute, but it's basically, I am how I am, and I accept and I respect and appreciate myself as I am, I'm aware of my faults and challenges. I'm not going to pretend they're not there, but I accept and appreciate and respect myself despite those things, maybe. I accept and respect and appreciate and love myself for all of my strengths, for all of the value I have to offer to the world, for just for existing, just for being, right? It's like the fundamental thing, for being as I am, right? So it's not arrogance, it's also not complacency, it's not, oh, I'm good enough now, I don't have to work on improving myself, I don't have to work on growing and developing and evolving, I don't have to just accept like that I'm a violent person or a bigoted person, whatever. No. But even if you are a bigoted person or even a violent person or whatever it might be, you gotta honor yourself for where you're at, Not because you deserve it, maybe you don't deserve it. Maybe you're an awful person. But the point is, you're never going to be anything other than an awful person if you don't start with this, right? If you don't, accept and appreciate where you're at, right? And so, yeah, there are aspects of myself that when I started on this journey, frankly, I hated myself and was disgusted with aspects of myself. And yet, I don't think I ever would have moved out of them and through them and beyond them if I'd have stuck with that attitude, right? I had to shift into honoring and respecting myself as I am. And then from there, I could start to evolve and grow and change and not be that person anymore. And I wasn't a violent person. I used to be, as a 13, 14-year-old was probably the last time I was violent, But for instance, I was a drug addict, right? And so long as I hated myself for that, and I did. I hate being dependent on something. I felt like a freedom, so I really didn't like it. But there's all this disgust, and you're so weak, and you're so pathetic, and all this kind of stuff about being a drug addict. And I had to really just honor myself and accept myself as I was. Okay, I'm kind of in the grip of an addiction. Before I was able to move out of it, right? That's just accept where I was at the very least and respect myself despite the fact that I had this weakness. And it worked, right? And yeah, if I'd have beaten myself up, oh, you're so useless, I'm sure I'd still be taking drugs today. So self-honoring is really important for all kinds of personal development reasons, but in terms of what we're talking about here, really important for that. And so the last quality, now this is probably arguably the least important for influencing overall out of these four, I will admit it. I know that, for instance, some people are managing to be successfully influential while being purposefully kind of mystifying things and making things seem more complicated than they actually are and kind of befuddling people. Yeah, there is that kind of contradiction there, which I have considered. However, I would say that in the context of the kind of influencing that we're specifically going to be doing, so helping other people through our products or services to have better health and well-being, we've got to have this one, right? We've got to be clear. We've got to be on the surface. We've got to appear to have clarity, be knowledgeable, be informed, have understanding, all of those kind of qualities, right? Otherwise, people are basically not going to listen to us, even if all the other factors are in place. So let's imagine, put yourself in the other person's shoes for a second again. So let's imagine that you're really struggling with this digestive problem, for instance, right? And so you meet someone and they're kind and nice and friendly, right? And they're high status and they're an authentic person. And they seem to tick all the buttons. They make you feel good, right, in these various ways. And you're really glad and, but are you going to trust your digestive health to them? Not if you're not confident that they don't know what they're talking about, right? So that is an important factor within this context, right? Now, not always, and again, this may seem like a disparaging comment, but for instance, if what you're selling is a religion, what you say making sense is not actually as important as you'd think. If you're selling a seduction, it's not as important, to be completely clear. Maybe being various other qualities is more important. But in the context of what we're doing, this is really, really important to the point of being crucial, to the point that I had to include it, all right? So one lesson I'll just add for this about influence, which is a really interesting fact of influence, is that if you are able to describe a person's problem or challenge to them better than they can describe it to themselves, they will automatically, unconsciously assume that you have the solution. All right? Say that one again. If you can describe a person's problem to them better than they can describe it to themselves in their own head, they will automatically, unconsciously assume that you have the solution. All right? So, this is why, and it kind of doesn't make sense to, maybe if you don't understand this, why we spend so much time maybe describing the challenge or the problem when we're doing influencing, or letting the other person describe the challenge and the problem, in the case of if we're having an interactive conversation, and then repeating it back to them. So, so a person spends 15 minutes talking about the problem they're having with digestion, and then you spend 2 minutes basically repeating the essence of it back to them, maybe with a little bit more clarity than they said it, because they said it in a kind of muddled, confused kind of way. They can go, yeah, that's right, you get it, right? So what does that do? It first of all will stimulate oxytocin again, right? Like you get it. There's a connection. You understand. There's a bond there. But it also really stimulates serotonin, right? It stimulates a confidence that you are going to be able to help them, right? Which is so important, right? And actually being able to describe the problem better than they can is actually a better influence tool to help someone feel confident that you can help them than describing to them the solution. Now, I'm not saying you have to limit yourself to one or the other, but it's interesting, and certainly that's why you have to do it in that order. Like if someone says, I have digestive problems, and you go, oh, right, well, what you need to do is, first of all, you need to take this herb that really helps with digestion. Second of all, they'd like to listen to you. You might even seem knowledgeable, but you're not going to seem like you've got a high level of clarity, right? Because what gives you that perception, remember we talked about surface appearance, perception of having a high level of clarity, with a combination of caring, right, as we've already talked about, is that you really understand the challenge and you really understand what they want, right? A lot of the value you can offer as a coach specifically is helping people clarify what they want, because most people only know their problems. They don't know what their goals at all. So if you have for instance, like a trial or free session with someone, and they leave the session with a greater clarity on what their problem is, and a much greater clarity, usually on what actually they want, their goals, they're going to be much more likely to sign up with you and want more sessions with you than if you go on a call and you just start giving them how-to information of what to do. It's counterintuitive, but it is the way that it works, right? So to be really clear and knowledgeable, but I want to say not clear and knowledgeable necessarily in the way that you might think clear and knowledgeable, right? But really clear and knowledgeable on understanding the other person, right? Understanding what their challenge is and what they want, and then maybe third to that, understanding what they need to actually do, right? So oxytocin, serotonin, and then also, so while dopamine is primarily about what a person wants, we also talked about it's also about an ability to accurately predict, right? And so generally when we feel a lack of clarity, we feel low dopamine, and when we feel more clarity, we feel more dopamine, right? And so if you help a person feel more clear, they feel a feeling of dopamine often equal to as if you've helped them get what they want, right? So, and this is, where a lot of maybe psychotherapy, works. Rather than helping people get results, it helps them understand the problem, right? Now, I don't think that's as valuable. Obviously, you probably know I'm a results kind of guy, right? I would rather help someone get an apple than help them understand why they're struggling, why they struggle so much to get apples. Do you know what I mean? But what I'm kind of trying to convey is that the latter does provide real value neurochemically, right? It stimulates dopamine. So if you help someone, remember, other people mirror you, right? So if you have a high degree of clarity, then they will feel more clear. And if they feel more clear, they feel more dopamine, right? Now, the inner root of that, you've probably heard me speak about this before, so I won't go into it into too much detail. But really the root of clarity, the inner root within you of clarity, is not what you think it is. What you think it is, or almost certainly what you think is the inner root of appearing knowledgeable, is the accumulation of knowledge. That is not what it's actually about. What it's actually about is honesty, right? The thing that really reduces your ability to think clearly, as well as your ability to remember things accurately and all the rest of it, is bullshit. It's lies, it's self-deception, it's illusions, it's distortions, it's all of that stuff, right? That so like dishonesty of any kind, I would describe it as akin to like a virus in your computer that stops things like displaying correctly, right? And it slows down the processing speed of your CPU, and eventually like the whole thing, you know, basically grinds to a halt, right? That's what happens to a human mind as well when it's like overloaded with bullshit. So a lot of the process of getting more clear on the, like appearing more clear on the surface is not the process of stuffing yet more information into your head, although if it's relevant information, it can be helpful. It's clearing away the bullshit, right? And so that's why we do as much of that, at least within these kind of trainings, or that's my aim, other than giving you more information, right? I hope even as a result of this training, though it hasn't been a heavy focus with this one, like as much as you've learned new stuff, you've also learned why stuff that you thought was true was not true, right? And I try not to emphasize that too much because, you know, I don't like basically every training with me, you associate with me going, this is why you're wrong, and this is you're wrong about this, and you're also wrong about this. You know, I don't want that to be your association. But I hope that subtly like that is going on anyway, in the sense, okay, so, you know, I'd always thought that this is the case, and actually I realized that this is the case. We've just talked about it here, right? You might have had a belief that to really help people, you need to have lots of information in your head and you need to tell them what to do. And I've just kind of, maybe not that subtly, told you that actually that's not true at all, right? And so you're, as much as, you know, it is about learning, you know, accurate information, it's also about, and probably more about, unlearning inaccurate information, right? So that's what I mean by honesty. Clearing away the bullshit, clearing away all the things that aren't true, right? So the inner root, we've got honesty, we can also call it a love of truth, which is perhaps a more poetic term, but I like it anyway. And so truth, what is truth, you know? Truth isn't that everyone's truth is equally valid kind of definition of truth. I don't mean that truth. I mean it's actually true in the real world, truth. That's what I'm talking about, right? So a lot of people, you know, theory of relativity, Einstein, everyone takes that to, not everyone, a lot of people take that to mean that everyone's opinion is equally, you know, valid and reasonable no matter how far divorced from reality it is. That's not what it means, right? What it means is, you know, something very obscure to do with physics, right? The bottom line is, which I won't go into because I can't remember it properly, but the bottom line is, it's about, you know, having a love of truth, and yeah, a love of truth above and beyond being a love of being right. You know, I mean, I love to be right as much as the next man, probably more. But I wanna know the truth even more. So if I'm wrong, I want to know that, right? If my perception of something is inaccurate, if my belief about something is inaccurate, if my frame is inaccurate, or even if it's accurate to a degree, but it could be improved upon, then I want to know, all right? Because I have a love of truth. And I would say that is the root of clarity. You have a love of truth, you have an honesty with yourself primarily, especially, then you will have clarity and you will appear knowledgeable, which will get all those neurochemicals flowing. Okay, last point, and then that's it. And what I was intending to be a shorter training, I hope it's ended up being at least a little bit shorter. It's going to be shorter than Module 4, because that was 4 hours. Our last focus is going to be on discovering / deciding your personal influencing type. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is the way that I influence is not going to be exactly the same as the way that you influence. You shouldn't try and be like me or anyone else, all right? How do I say this? Try it on, all right? So for instance, if you see yourself as a very nervous, low self-esteem, low confidence, low certainty person, you could try to be more authoritative if that's how you perceive me, but you don't have to try and be as authoritative as me or as confident as me, right? If you're someone who's like very sedate, very laid back, very relaxed. You can try being as upbeat or enthusiastic as Brendon Burchard, or try being more so like him, but you don't have to be as enthusiastic as him to be as effective as him as an influencer, right? If on the other hand you are more of a, let's see, do I need another example? Yeah, probably not, right? But you get the point, right? So, you want to be all the qualities I talked about. You want to be the 10 qualities I talked about in the wealth training. But as to how much of each of those things that you are, like find your own type, right? So with the 4 qualities we've just talked about, you know, maybe you'll excel at clarity because you're really, really a lover of truth, and you know you've been in the quest of truth your whole life. Maybe you know if you've been in the quest of truth your whole life, you're maybe not so much of an emotional person, so you're going to be less of a caring type, more of a knowledgeable type. You know, more of a clear type, but that's okay. That could just be your influence type, as long as you make sure you have some caring in there, right? Or vice versa. Maybe you haven't been that, like you're a feeling person, you're not that bothered about truth and accuracy and all that. You know, what matters to you is to care about people, to love and to feel happy and to help other people feel happy, stuff like that. So you need to have some, you know, clarity and love of truth and all the rest of it. But if you want to be mainly a feeling, caring type, or especially particularly a feeling, caring type, that could be your type of influence. Do you get kind of what I'm saying here? So you need all those ingredients that I just mentioned, right? And all the ones in the wealth training, really. But the proportions of those ingredients can vary depending on your own specific type, all right? So there's a quote from one of the people who specialises in teaching about this, which I love, which I'm going to give to you. So her name is Sally Hogshead, and she says, different is better than better, all right? Different is better than better. This is such a key concept to understand. When I was first starting, like the people I looked up to at the time, like in the health world, was David Wolfe, and in the, or before I first started, just before, health world was David Wolfe, in the kind of coaching kind of world was Tony Robbins, and I was like, I'm never going to be better than those guys. You know, they're amazing. Like David Wolfe, he talks so, you know, charismatically, you know, so well about all this stuff, and Tony Robbins, he's so inspiring, so motivational. I'm never going to be as good as them. So what's the point, right? And then I heard this slogan years later, but I think I got this concept back then. I don't have to be better than them, right? Because different to them is what matters, right? And in fact, being different from the average, that's what matters, right? Being different from whoever else. Now, I've talked about this in many times before in different coaching calls, which you may or may not have access to, but you know, I've realized that people ended up like being my client and preferring me, even sometimes to people like, or specifically David Wolfe or Tony Robbins, maybe sometimes for good reasons, right? I've since discovered not so great things about those people, none of which I'm willing to share, but you know, like I've just realized they're not perfect, you know? And you know, so maybe there are some ways that I am able to add more value than this person, to a specific kind of person at least. I remember when I got my first client, like, not my first client, but my first client who said to me, you know what, I've been into all this personal development stuff for years, Owen. I've been into this person and that person and Tony Robbins, they said, and I heard it all before, but I never actually did it. I never took action on it. But since working with you, I've actually started to take action and I feel amazing. And that felt so good to me. That felt so rewarding and satisfying. And it made me realize this. Now, was the realization I had that I was better than Tony Robbins? No, of course not. I still don't think I am. And I probably never will be a better coach than him, right? Probably. Because that's been his sole focus. Even now, I've been doing it for 5 years, but I've been doing a lot of other stuff. Who knows, right? But I wouldn't be surprised because he's an exceptional person, right? And because maybe I'll choose to, you know, specialize in other things and whatever. So, but that's okay, right? I can still add more value to that woman, and I've still added maybe more value to many other people. And so the reason is because it's okay, like I'm just different, right? Maybe like the level of enthusiasm, excitement that Brendon Burchard has is irritating to some people. Maybe the level of positivity that Tony Robbins has is like, infuriating to someone who's feeling a little bit more, negative about life. Maybe the degree of, what's the word? Enthusiasm, I guess that'd be the word again, that someone like David Wolf has for superfoods is like, irritating to someone else. And I know that that's the case because that's exactly the feedback I've got from people, right? So there's no such thing as better. There's only different, right? And in fact, from a purely marketing, positioning in the world point of view, different is better than better. Actually, not just from that point of view. In the world of seduction, for instance, one of the crazy things that they teach you, and this is true for men and women, is that actually it's not necessarily about being the most beautiful or the most good looking or the most whatever. It's just about standing out. So there's this thing called peacocking, where the people like wear ridiculous things and like stand out, and like men with like covered in tattoos or wearing like crazy jewelry, or women with like ridiculously oversized breasts or buttocks these days, or really really long legs, or the longest biggest dress or the shortest skirt or whatever it might be. It's not necessarily about, in the case of, let's say, let's pick something fairly neutral, like having like the tallest hat, right? That's not from a status, survival, reproduction point of view. There's no real survival value in that, but it does elevate your status and therefore your reproductive capacity slightly in many cases, because it's just different. It makes you stand out, right? And maybe the fact that you're not afraid to stand out makes you high status. Maybe that's the kind of root of it, right? But the point is, if you're not a good-looking guy or you're not a good-looking gal, that doesn't necessarily mean you can't be the highest status person in the party reproductively, because you can make yourself the most different, and that can elevate your status to being the most valuable, right? So that's true in the whole mating game, and it's absolutely true in the whole offering your products and services game, what we're talking about probably more here, right? So different is better than better. Different is better than better. Different is better than better. I'm saying it often enough that I hope that you actually remember it, because I think it's a really, really, really good slogan, right? So should you try and be the best you that you can be? Absolutely, right? But you don't have to be the best. You could say, oh, well, I can't do this selling because there's all these other people who I appreciate and love and look up to, and they're better than me. Okay, I'm not even convinced you, no, you're just as good as them. Maybe you're not. Maybe they've been doing it for 30 years and they're really good at it. You might not be as good as them. But it doesn't matter, because you don't have to be better than them. You just have to be different. And, I've talked about this before. People have, I know that people have listened to me for all kinds of reasons, and not the other people who I mentioned, for all kinds of reasons, some of which are valid, for instance, because maybe I'm less, hyper and excitable, or less kind of boundlessly positive, like I'm able to see the negative as well as the positive, but also for completely stupid reasons. Well, reasons that I judge to be stupid. Sorry if you relate to any of these, but for instance, one I hear a lot is, oh, I trusted you more and I'm more likely to listen to you or buy your product or service because you've got a British accent. To me, that's like, well, that doesn't mean I can help you anymore to get real results. But okay, so, I consider that to be stupid. But you know what? I'm more likely to buy from someone if they have a British accent. So I'm calling it stupid, but it's I have it too, right? Because they're from my British tribe, right? I'm less likely to buy from someone, certainly if, I won't reveal my prejudices here, but if they have certain other accents, right? Non-British. Not everyone, I'm not against everyone, but I just have my personal tastes, like you do, like everyone does, right? So, different is better than better. Are you remembering that? So, what makes you different? Well, I'm going to give you a couple of little starting points here, one of which I already mentioned. One is Sally Hogshead, and she's got a great book called How to Fascinate, right? There's a test that goes along with this particular one that costs some money. I might still have some free tokens left over, in which case I will put them in the link underneath, or I'll put a link underneath. Hopefully I'll still have some free tokens, otherwise it doesn't cost very much. And it basically just tells you what, I think 40 out of 42 different types, what influence type you are, right? And so within that you can go, okay, so, I'm not this, I'm this, right? And so that helps you kind of, this is what brand really means. Well, this is kind of where we're starting to get to. What makes you interesting? What makes you different? What makes you unique rather than why are you better, right? If you're trying to answer the question, why are you better? You're thinking of yourself in a commoditized way. If you're answering why are you unique, that's a much smarter thing to be talking about, and maybe not talking about, but to be showing in your positioning, right? Interestingly enough for me, when I did this test, and then there's like kind of a grid, I don't know if you can see that, with your different types there. I'm sure you can't read them, but you get the idea, right? And I was this particular type, combination of the Maestro and the Victor. So a little exercise that she gives you is look at the keywords that she gives you and kind of match them up, and you can come up with a little like way of describing yourself, basically. So the 6 words that I was given was ambitious, focused, confident, respected, competitive, and results oriented. I didn't kind of relate to all of those. I wouldn't like call myself ambitiously competitive, for instance. I don't think that is really relevant to, you know, teaching people that I help them with health. But I did think, results focused. Is that maybe actually how I already have been describing myself when forced to describe myself on my website? I think it is. So I thought, there's definitely some validity to that, right? And so this kind of helps you see the value that you can offer in terms of who you are as a person, and more specifically in terms of how you come across to other people. That's quite a complex model, comes with a little test. Another one which is really good is a nice little book called The Charisma Myth, and the subtitle to it is How Anyone Can Master the Art and Science of Personal Magnetism, right? So the reason it's myth is because like this idea that we have that some people are charismatic and some people aren't is kind of bullshit, right? We all have that capacity within us. It's really about tapping into our own type. This is a significantly simpler model than this one. There's 42 different types in here, and you kind of have to do a test. With this, there's basically just 4, and you read them and see which you relate to the most. I like them both. I think they're both great models. And, you know, go for whichever one you want or both, and by all means, like, go into more, right? I really think there's you know, no harm in this. The more of these tests you take, really the better, especially when you start to see the commonalities between them. The only thing I'd kind of say, my personal preference these days is for tests based on the way you actually are, not based on random arbitrary information. Like, for instance, your date of birth, you know. I mean, maybe there's some relevance to stuff. I don't mean to, like, you know, be disparaging about anyone who's into astrology or numerology or anything that's based on date of birth. I'd just say, like, me, when I was 9 years old versus 19 versus 29 versus 39, such a radically different person that I don't think that's helpful to just know that, you know, just be told I'm exactly the same at every point in my life. And I realised with astrology, yeah, I know, all right, so there's different cycles and, you know, it does change a bit over time, but yeah. I'm a bit skeptical, and not as someone who doesn't know, but as someone who's gone into it in a vast amount of detail, I'm a bit skeptical about it. I prefer the whole just based on actual observation things, and so I'd encourage you to at least start with those, based on actual tests, even better. You know, just define yourself, define your type, right? What kind of type of person are you? You know, you'll probably recognize a lot of what's in here, very kind of similar to what we've already talked about, and are not exactly the same. But yeah, you know, are you a type who leads by, you know, if we just refer back to the 4 that we talked to before, are you a type who is charismatic and leads and influences primarily by being, you know, kind, nice, friendly, or by being powerful, confident, decisive, or by being authentic, honest, trustworthy, or clear and knowledgeable, you know, for instance, right? That's similar to her model, although not exactly the same. So just start to kind of define, like, you know, you, like, what is your personal preference, what are you better at, and especially how do people already naturally see you and treat you, because the way you think of yourself might not be the way that other people think of you, all right? And so again, remember what I said right at the beginning of the video, this isn't about like getting into a world of self-obsession, it's all about me, but it's also not like being clueless about the effect we have on other people and how other people perceive us, because that is crucially important, right? So remember, I'll finish with the place that I started. Remember that delicate balance, right? On the one hand, people are judging and evaluating you, especially when you're attempting to influence them, very, very carefully. And so we want to make sure that we create the impression that gives us the result that we want. And yet we want to be honest and true to ourselves and all the rest of it. And specifically, we don't want to be focused on ourselves. We don't want to be worried about how we're coming across, what other people are thinking of us, all the rest of it. So I want to be focused on the other person and, you know, their world, their goals, their dreams, their challenges, and all the rest of it. So hope that makes sense. Your homework, I guess, although it's optional, is to go ahead and really define your type, and to, more importantly, to really get into, irrespective of what your specific type is, the less optional homework is to really get into developing these qualities in yourself, these outside qualities, by developing these inner qualities, right? So what are you going to do over the next week, stroke lifetime, to increase your level of innate and real caring, or at least curiosity for those around you? What you're going to do to help yourself feel more free on a deep level? What you're going to do to honor yourself on a more regular, daily, moment by moment basis? And what are you going to do to encourage and or elicit and develop more of a self-honesty and love of truth within yourself? That will naturally allow these roots will naturally allow these flowers to appear, and will naturally stimulate these wonderful feel-good reactions in other people, making you an influential person.